Tennessee has a tragedy, the education system has an agenda, and Trump has a change of mind. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is The Glorious Rescue.
Aren't you tired of feeling forced to choose between staying informed and being indoctrinated? Listen to the condensed news cycle without the lies, agendas, and confusion from the mainstream media, all while engaging in deeper discussions about the principles that have influenced our great nation. This is what rescuing America looks like. This is The Glorious Rescue.
Welcome back to another episode of The Glorious Rescue. I'm very excited for you to be here and continuing to tune in every Tuesday and Friday. As you can see, we have a little bit different of a setup of props and all that. So thank you so much for tuning in. We're continuing to upgrade the studio that is my bedroom. Oops, I just let it out, I guess. But for today's episode, I'm very excited about it. We're going to spend the vast majority in the end of show segment of The Vast Past. And today we're just going to briefly go through the headlines, starting off very, very quickly with a very unfortunate event in Tennessee. And that was, unfortunately, a tragedy, an explosion in downtown Nashville, and buildings and windows shattering and all that. And I'm not going to get too far into it because now it was on Christmas Day. It was a Christmas Day explosion and bombing. And obviously, we didn't cover it on Friday because the episodes are slightly pre-recorded. And so with that, unfortunately, I wasn't able to cover it on Friday, but maybe that's a good thing that we could spend Christmas not necessarily focused on something so tragic. But now we're here talking about it. Now that it has been several days, we know a little bit more than what has happened, and that is there were some human remains found there that have been identified by police reports that was the individual. So not much to cover there. I don't want to spend too much time on that because it is sad. It is a tragedy, and our hearts obviously go out to those in Nashville. Very briefly, there was a school that would not let a little boy, I shouldn't say a little boy, a senior, an individual's son opt out of a class that promotes anti-white racism. Now she's suing. Very simply put, this school came out with some sort of curriculum or project that the students had to go through anti-racism type training, and it was really racist towards white individuals. And the mother wanted to opt her son out of it, and she could not. And the scores or whatnot were supposed to be private, and they ended up going out to all teachers and administrators, and the boy got threats, going out to colleges, I even believe, as well. And it was supposed to be a quiet thing, a private thing. So obviously, things were not as they seemed, and the boy didn't want to go through it. He had religious or political qualms with it, and then the mother did as well, and the child wasn't allowed to opt out. The kid received horrible marks and was threatened and all that stuff for it. So she's suing. So that's a little bit of a note for all of you there, and we're going to talk about the education system a little bit further in the initial segment. So make sure to stay tuned. It is a very deep discussion. I know what we're about to get into, and it's actually going to be an excerpt from this book and Primus, this book just being a collection of different speeches and writings and whatnot. So just rolling through the headlines right here, in Chicago, Illinois, there's a concealed carry permit holder who shot and killed a would-be burglar. And it has been confirmed now that this individual was an employee of the store, we do believe, and assuming his life was threatened as well, because again, burglar implies that, and shot and killed the individual. Chicago and Illinois in general has a radically higher crime rate than it did back in 2019. The whole abolish the police or defund the police movement and the anti-police sentiment that is in a lot of these downtown areas has gone through the roof, spiking crime as well. And so in Chicago, homicides have spiked 50% in 2020 over 2019. More than 4,000 people have been shot. In the city, more than 800 murders. Crime going through the roof in Chicago. And with that, something else going through the roof being people applying for concealed carry permits, something I'm all for. I am all for people exercising their Second Amendment right to protect their private property, to protect their personal life as well as the lives of others. So this was obviously a case where someone avoided burglary, harm to themselves, harm to others because of a concealed carry permit, because of the use of arms, something that is our constitutional right and something that really is our God-given right to protect our other God-given rights. Lastly, again, just moving through these very quickly to give time for our end of show segment, is Trump, and he reportedly signed the coronavirus stimulus package and spending bill, something I 100% was against. It is very unfortunate, but he did so on the hopes of them passing a larger stimulus check and a larger stimulus bill just for more stimulus checks or larger stimulus checks. So the idea being that they were going to pass this one, and the stimulus checks, the $600 ones, should roll out with hopes of Congress coming out with larger checks. Again, I'm not in support of the government handing out free money. I do think it would be more beneficial for them to just simply open up the economy and let people go back to work rather than just handing out free money. So the deficit way up, the debt way up. It is unfortunate. This is not free money. This is money that our children and our children's children are going to have to pay for. But nevertheless, he did sign it probably because of the huge pressure he was receiving, and then again with hopes of larger checks going out later. Now we're going to move right into our end of show segment. I wanted to give ourselves ample time to dive into this deeper discussion into the vast past. Welcome back to another segment of the vast past. I give us a little bit more time in the news cycle, I should say a little less time, to give us more time for this end of show segment. I'm extraordinarily excited about today's segment a little bit deeper, as some of these always are, or some of these are, I should say. And so I want to give us ample time to get into this, something I think is very, very important. The difference between freedom and a license to do what we will. As we know and as we've talked about on the show, when the founders referenced the pursuit of happiness, did they just mean the idea of having freedom to pursue whatever we want, whatever we think makes us happy? Does that mean pleasure? Does that mean just temporal items? What do they mean by that? And so today is really, we're going to be going through an entire speech. I'm just going to be taking excerpts here and there and portions, I should say, from Robert George, and he addressed Hillsdale College, and the speech is entitled Freedom and Its Counterfeit. Freedom and Its Counterfeit. I'm going to start off a little bit later in the speech where he says, "True freedom consists in the liberation of the human person from the shackles of ignorance, oppression, and vice. Thus it was stated and declared that education, by lifting a man out of ignorance, disqualifies him from being a slave. What overcomes ignorance is knowledge, and the object of knowledge is truth, empirical, moral, and spiritual." One of the things that I love about this when he started off is basically saying that the way to have true freedom is to break free the bonds of ignorance, oppression, and vice. We talked about how Thomas Jefferson, I believe it was, who said, "Educate the whole masses of the American people. That is the only sure reliance of our liberty," something along the lines of that. That to be free means to be educated, to be knowledged. And he says, again, the antithesis of that freedom would be vice, meaning that to have true freedom would be to live a moral life. And that, again, lifting a man out of ignorance, the pursuit of education, disqualifies him from being a slave. That you cannot be a slave, and that you will be free if you pursue this education. True freedom, the freedom that liberates, is grounded in truth and ordered to truth, and therefore to virtue. A free person is enslaved neither to the sheer will of another, nor to his own appetites and passions. A free person lives uprightly, fulfilling his obligations to family, community, nation, and God. By contrast, a person given over to his appetites and passions, a person who scoffs at truth and chooses to live, whether openly or secretly, in defiance of the moral law, is not free. He is simply a different kind of slave. A little bit deeper, I guess I'm just going to go paragraph by paragraph here. But again, the idea that a free person is not just free from maybe government tyranny that we tend to think of when we think of freedom, but also means free from our own pleasures, our own appetites, our own passions. A freedom that liberates is grounded in truth. And that truth, like he says, is ordered to what? What is the pursuit of that truth for? Why? What is the whole goal of knowing truth? It's so that we can live within that confines of truth, to live a good, virtuous life. He goes on by saying, the counterfeit of freedom consists in the idea of personal and communal liberation from morality, responsibility, and truth. The counterfeit of freedom, the fake freedom, the false concept of freedom is the idea that we're free to live how we want. Free to live, free from the obligations of morality, responsibility, and truth, like he says. It is what our nation's founders expressly distinguished from liberty and condemned as, quote, license. This is the key here. The so-called freedom celebrated today by so many of our opinion-shaping elitists in education, entertainment, and the media is simply the license to do whatever one pleases. This false conception of freedom, false because disordered because detached from moral truth and civic responsibility, shackles those in its grip no less powerfully than did the chattel slavery of old. He is stating that there is not only a concept of slavery back prior to the 1860s in our nation's history, the idea of actual slavery, enslaving one by force, coercion, or even government tyranny. There's a deeper sense of false freedom, or a deeper sense of slavery, a deeper meaning of slavery, being slave to our own vice, being slaved to mankind's own immorality. It's a false conception of freedom, and it shackles people, like he says, in its grip no less powerfully than the old slavery. Enslavement to one's own appetites and passions is no less brutal a form of bondage for being a slavery of the soul. It is no less tragic indeed. It is in certain respects immeasurably more tragic for being self-imposed. It is ironic, is it not, that people who celebrate slavery to appetite and passion call this bondage freedom. Counterfeit freedom is worse than fraudulent. It speaks the language of rights, but in abandoning the ground of moral duty, it provides no rational basis for anyone to respect the rights of others, or to demand of others respect for one's own rights. What he is saying here, and I struggle a little bit because I don't know if I should just read the entire speech or kind of go through it piece by piece, and I kind of come to the idea of going piece by piece so that I don't go through the entire thing and then miss certain things that I want to discuss or point out the more important things. And I think this entire speech is important. I think it's very good, and I think it is truly what the founders were referencing when they talked about liberty. They were not talking about a license to do as we will. But what is he referring here? He's saying when you basically use your freedom and you label your license to do whatever you want as a freedom. I feel like I want to do this, that, and the other. That's not necessarily a right, but you're going to label it as your freedom. You're just going to label your licenses to do whatever you want as a freedom. What it means is now you have no grounds to stand on to protect your rights or to respect the rights of others, because you're now no longer based in truth. You're just based in your own desires. And so now you have no grounds to pursue respecting another's rights or to defending your own, because it's all based in your own desires. And then he furthermore, I should say, defines it by saying, and exemplifies what he's saying, by stating where the moral truth as the ground of duties is thrown overboard, the language of rights is so much idle chatter fit for only Hollywood cocktail parties. The idea of it's nothing. Using your license as freedom is just absolutely nothing. He goes on, if freedom is to be honored and respected, it must be because human freedom is what is required by the law of nature and of nature's God. It cannot be because there are no laws of nature and there is no God. Again, denying God, denying truth, denying morality, and then using that as a license, freedom as a license to go do whatever you will. There's now no grounds for your rights, no grounds to protect the rights of others. He goes on, but counterfeit freedom poses greater danger still, as their founders warned a people given over to license will be incapable of sustaining Republican government. For Republican government by the people, requires a people who are prepared to take responsibility for the common good, including the preservation of the conditions of liberty. He quotes someone else by saying, unrestrained freedom is anarchy. Restrained only by force and arms is despotism. Self-restrained is republicanism. And that really is the idea here, right? Living within the confines of morality, living a good life, and self-guiding and self-directing your life within the confines of truth, within the confines of what is right, what is good. And by doing so, by performing self-government, there's now no need for really a tyrannical government. There's no need for government in general because we are governing ourselves. And that is how we have true republicanism, true republican government, because we are governing ourselves. Yet so long as the big government-provided pottage functions as a suitable narcotic, they imagine themselves free. I obviously skipped a little bit there. But when people use their license, use liberty as a license to do whatever they will, then they have this idea in their mind that they are addicted to. And their mind is addicted to the idea of using their liberty as a license to do whatever they will, that they imagine themselves free, that they live in a state of believing themselves to be free men, when in reality they're enslaved to their own passions and enslaved to their own self. At the same time, the lack of virtue creates a counterfeit idea of equality that parallels the counterfeit conception of freedom. There's no equality, there's no freedom, because everyone can do whatever they will, and there is truly no liberty and no rights. Ultimately, the counterfeit of freedom is a counterfeit because its view of the nature, dignity, and destiny of man is a false view. Men and women are not mere bundles of appetites. Our destiny is not to be, as David Hume supposed, slaves of our passion. We are men and women made in the very image and likeness of the divine ruler of the universe, and are possessors of an intelligence more profound. We are creatures, to be sure fallen creatures, dust of the earth, sinners every one. Yet the divine image, the icon of God himself, is not destroyed. We are fashioned in God's image. We are indeed, as the Declaration of Independence says, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Freedom, true freedom, is, as President Bush recently had occasion to remind us, God's gift to mankind. The self-government that is the right of the free men and women is truly a sacred trust. He goes on by basically saying that the education system is not a bastion for religion and morality and teaching religion, or teaching good principles at least to our children. And then he goes on by saying that some colleges do, some institutions do, and those institutions carry on a flame. the flame that has not been extinguished, the flame that has been nurtured and guarded with a sleepless vigilance. It is by that carefully tended flame that our minds have been illumined to understand the nature and foundations of freedom and the responsibility of Republican government. I say to you today, keep the flame alive. Hand it on, glowing even more brightly to your children and your children's children. March forward with the flame aloft in your chosen fields of business, law, medicine, and sciences, education, government, journalism, music, and the arts. Do not hide your light under a bushel. Be living statues of liberty, boldly illuminating the landscape of freedom for all whose lives you touch. Many points that we can take away, many points that we have already taken away from as we've kind of went through this, but just a few points. I think one of the best summaries of what true freedom is, and making the distinction between what is liberty and what is a license, and people using liberty as a license to do whatever they will. People scream today, this is my right, these are my rights, but truly what they desire is just simply a license to go do whatever they will. That is not the liberty our founders intended. Our founders intended a liberty, a freedom, the idea to be free from government because we self-govern. And through that self-government, we then are given the opportunity to live good, moral lives. The pursuit of happiness is what that really means. And then he goes on and talks about many different points that we can continue on, but that the idea of we can only live in a truly free society if we are knowledgeable of the truth, if we know these principles and love these principles and apply them to our lives. And then from that truth, we then know what is good and what is right. The truth of Scripture, what is good and what is right. And then living within those confines, we are now given the opportunity to live in a free society because, again, we are governing ourselves. I love how he says that type of slavery to appetites, slavery to passion is a worse slavery than what we think of physical slavery, being enslaved to the government or to another individual. I like how he says that people imagine themselves free when they're just using liberty as really a license to fulfill their own passions. And then again, how he wraps up basically saying that the education system, the entertainment industry, our whole culture really is under this idea, is under this false sense of liberty as a license. And that because of that, tragically, the legacy of liberty is gone out. But there are some bastions of that liberty that hold that torch. And then he gives that rallying cry to hold on to that torch, to not hide it under a bushel, but to proclaim it, share it with future generations, pass it on to our children and our children's children so that they can live in that liberty-loving and liberty-promoting society, liberty-promoting country as well. That is the rallying cry I give to all of you. Hopefully, I know a little bit longer of an end of show segment, but hopefully a very applicable one to you, one that you can look at and say, that is what I desire, to understand the principles of truth, what is good and what is right, and that by my choosing to live by those biblical principles, I am promoting liberty. And by passing on those good principles to my children, they are then inculcating that liberty into their lives as well, willing to share it with others so that others can share that message as well. Again, boosting liberty and promoting liberty in our nation. Not to be confused, again, as a license to do whatever we will. I hope that was very helpful to you. I know we spent the vast majority of the episode today in a longer end of show segment. Not something we normally do, but I hope it was very helpful to you. And I hope you will continue to tune in. Again, continue to tune in on Friday as we have episodes every Tuesday and Friday. So don't forget to tune in, whether on YouTube channel. We will be back here on the YouTube channel like normal. It's just a fluke last episode that we've already corrected. And so we will be back here on YouTube as well as all the audio platforms. Make sure to subscribe or hit that like button, follow, share, whatever it is. And then if you see our content over on Instagram, make sure to share that as well. It is always appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is The Glorious Rescue.